Pleasure to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. The wait for the approval from World Health Organization or WHO for Bharat Biotech's Covaxin continues. This wait now continues. We've been very closely tracking this. Now, the WHO has been very seriously considering all the information that Bharat Biotech has submitted to them, the process that actually started several months ago. And the approval for the emergency use, which will enable us to really, one, export the vaccine to many more countries, two, our own travel would become easier. All of that really depends on this decision by WHO. Its technical advisory group has now sought additional clarification from Bharat Biotech to conduct a final risk-benefit assessment such that they can put it on the list for emergency use. Now, all of this is also, yes, still for emergency use. The approval that we gave to Bharat Biotech's Covaxin almost a year ago, late last year. And the wait this time by WHO has been very long. In fact, in July is when Bharat Biotech submitted its exhaustive dossier, which was then accepted for review in July. In April, there was a bit of a conversation that they had to come back with a lot more information. So actually, they gave all of that in July. Then more data had to be submitted as per the requirements of WHO. So that took place, and the WHO then took it up only in September. Since then, a couple of these sessions have happened where they've reviewed the data, but repeatedly they have asked for more data or some clarity, additional clarity, so much so because there was so much of conversation around it that at one point WHO said that we're not going to fall or come under pressure, that we have certain requirements to meet and only when we are satisfied will we give the approval. And so that really goes on. Now, I am picking this up today because I know many of you want to know what is going on with this approval. Why is there a delay? Many of us who've taken Covaxin would have travel plans, and a lot of countries are actually very insistent only specific vaccines, Covaxin not being one of them, and that makes it extremely tricky. Some have even asked me all this while as to why is this happening? Is there a genuine concern with the vaccine? Well, we've been actually using it since January. So I would ask the experts as to why is this happening? What explains the delay in the WHO approval? Is it simply a case where Bharat Biotech really can't get the process right and they can't get the information right in one go? I say good evening to Abantika Ghosh, health editor for The Print. Joining me this evening, Dr. Rakesh Mishra, former director for CCMB, Dr. Rajesh Parekh, Director Medical Research at Jaslok Hospital, JVR Prasad Rao, former Union Health Secretary, Murli Neelkantan, lawyer specializing in healthcare law, also joins me this evening. Abantika, let's start off with you. Since you've been, more closely tracking and have a better understanding of all of this back and forth that has happened in the last many months. What is the key reason, according to your understanding? Is it just that we're not able to get it right, what the format is and what the requirement is?
I don't think it's just about the format because, between first we submitted whatever data was required in the format. Then between August 16th and October 14th, there were 8 communications asking for this data, that data. All of those things have been sent. And in fact, after last week's meeting between the health minister, Dr. Mansukh Mandavia, and the DG of WHO, highly placed official in the Ministry of Health, told me that so far as we are concerned, nothing remains. Everything is sorted. Everything is given. We are expecting a positive outcome on the 26th. So that is the government position. But having said that, there are some things. The phase 3 data, the efficacy data that we call it, that is yet to be peer reviewed. And if you go through some of the comments under the preprint, some of them are random comments, but some of them raise genuine scientific questions. I do not know the specific nature of the queries that WHO is raising, but just a cursory glance at the preprint and the comments below it, you see a lot of seemingly, logical scientific points being made there. So the peer review process is still not on. It's still not published in a scientific journal. That's one. Secondly, our own record of data collection, data keeping is kind of iffy, if I may use that word, because about 11 crore, a little more than 11 crore Covaxin shots have been given out. We've had 1 billion vaccines, but we still don't have the numbers which we should have of breakthrough infections, reinfections. These are, my sense is that we do not have these numbers because the government has time and time again refused to give these numbers. This is important information. Again, I do not know what what data WHO is seeking.
Yes.
But we have many gaps in our information sharing, in our data, that we have not been able to fill after all this while, though there are some genuine concerns there.
Okay, okay. Let me bring in Dr. Rakesh Mishra on this aspect. Dr. Mishra, also for the understanding of our viewers, because this will keep coming up. What is the process and the importance of peer reviews or for data to be actually published in a scientific journal that matters to WHO?
I'm not very sure that WHO should insist on publication of a scientific paper because this is something beyond that, and paper may take its own time. And I also know that Bharat Biotech is not a new player in this. They have earlier vaccines which are approved at this level. So it's not that they are doing the first time and they are missing out certain things. Is very confusing actually. So now, for instance, now WHO is not asking for a new data or anything, they're asking for certain clarifications. So I don't think there is anything major in this. We are seeing crores and crores of people have been given Covaxin. It is also clear that there may be some differences, but there is a clear-cut protection both against, reinfection or protection from vaccine breakthrough infection. I mean, these vaccines have helped so much now in this pandemic. So, but only thing is that only if these data are properly compiled and presented in a understandable or a discernible manner to WHO, they may be able to give this. So, I would like to believe that it's a matter of putting things together in a proper way, and let's hope that there's no bigger problem than that. But I don't think a publication of a paper should be that crucial for WHO. It has its own methods. It has its committee. They look into the thing. They are not anonymous reviewers who give comments and you can redo the things. That's a different kind of exercise. Of course, if you have reviewed paper, it helps a little bit, but that can't be criteria. So I think we are almost there and hope that in coming week Covaxin should get this approval because this is a successful vaccine as we see from our experience.
But Mr. Mishra, if that is the case, how do we explain it to citizens why a vaccine that we approved last December is still not getting the emergency use approval from WHO?
No, all the vaccines are emergency use only because
Yeah.
never in history you can have a vaccine within few months formal approval because we don't know how long they will provide protection and what are other granularities of this protection and what are long-term effects. Those are so they all will be emergency usage. So as I said, even when we gave approval to the vaccine, there were lot of discussions and primarily it was because of the lack of certain transparency in the sharing of the data, though it turns out that the decision was the correct one. So I think is the way putting the data and it's just a communication gap or maybe Bharat Biotech thinking it is good enough and they missed out on earlier occasions. But I think since this apparently is the last chance, at least for this committee, they should do whatever is required. I don't think there is any lack of data because WHO is not asking for new data, it's some clarification. So I hope they'll be able to provide that.
Okay, Murli Neelkantan, let me bring you in here as well, because the argument that's also being made is that Bharat Biotech is also not new to this. They've been in the business of pharmaceuticals for a while. So for them to uh, if it is said that they're not getting the process right, or whatever they have to submit in the right manner, then that also is a very difficult thing for me to understand. Surely a company like Bharat Biotech would have the best of the advisors telling them what exactly is it that WHO would want to know.
I agree with Dr. Mishra that WHO and Bharat Biotech are not new to each other. They both know how the system works. So what the WHO requires is well understood by the people at Bharat Biotech. So it's not some miscommunication, naivete on part of Bharat Biotech. I think in this case, and we can only speculate what the issues are, it may not be so much as to the science of it in this case, but it's a matter of presenting and answering a lot of questions. The situation arises in India as opposed to other countries because the regulatory approval accorded by India doesn't stand on the same basis as certain other countries because Indian drug regulator is not considered a stringent regulator. And therefore, the amount of review that the WHO will do for data that's provided by Bharat Biotech in this case will be higher than what it would have had it come from the UK or the US or Australia or Canada or other place. So that's the first issue. Secondly, there are lots of facts that are outside of this which needed to be explained. So, for example, what happened with the Anvisa report on the GMP? What happened with them not being able to replicate this GMP process in other plants? How do you explain the fact that certain batches didn't pass quality tests? So all those, so we may have the data, but an explanation for this from the standpoint of process may be necessary. Secondly, we've now had data from January up to October, and this is a rolling review. So perhaps it's an explanation for what the data was presented in April, what was presented in September, October, and what is now. Maybe there are some inconsistencies that need to be explained. Maybe there is a trend that needs to be explained. So there may be data, but explaining it in a manner that is acceptable to WHO and its experts may be the other thing. Thirdly, there is no urgency in this case. If you look at how the WHO thinks about emergency approvals and authorizations, is there an emergency in this case? We already have several vaccines already approved by the WHO. Secondly, even if there is a delay in approving this, there is nothing really at stake for the world because it's not as if we have 200 crores of stock lying there which can be immediately used. So in terms of the urgency to grant an approval, there is none in this case. We have other vaccines that are approved by the WHO. Those would be easily exported. So a lot of these factors come into play when the risk assessment is made. Is it necessary to take on the risk of this vaccine and everything that we don't know about it, approving it when it's not actually going to be exported anywhere in the world anytime in the next few months anyway? So that is the kind of thinking, I guess, that the WHO is up against.
Okay, interesting points that you have raised there, and maybe between the different time periods that they went, the data had some inconsistency. We don't know. We're trying to understand the process and thereby see what can be done. But Mr. Rao, good evening to you. Murli says for WHO there is also no urgency for them to give this approval since several of the vaccines are already there. They've got the approval, and so there isn't an urgency as far as WHO is concerned. But for us, it is important because many of the people in this country who've taken this vaccine, their plans of international travel and etc. for business and else for other reasons hang on this decision.
No, I think there is an emergency, even taking WHO into consideration also. I don't agree that there's no emergency on the WHO side because they have to supply a huge amount of vaccine under the Covax to African countries, where the coverage of vaccination is just about 10% now, even in countries like Kenya, which are sufficiently better off than the others. So if you have to cover this entire population, you need a lot more vaccine. And in the case of Covaxin, the additional advantage they have is they want to set up manufacturing facilities within those countries so that they can get the vaccine right there at the doorstep. So these long-term considerations need to be taken into consideration by WHO. Nobody says that WHO should, cut corners or adopt shortcut procedures, etc. But emergency approval is an emergency approval. It is not a normal approval. We are losing sight of the fact that, in this unprecedented pandemic, all the vaccines which have been approved until now are emergency approvals. Have you ever faced a situation that so many vaccines had to be given emergency approvals? Never before. That is the point I think which needs to be taken into consideration by WHO. And the fast track process, I would say, I won't say cut corners, but fast track. You have to fast track it. They have to take the urgency into consideration. It cannot be just a routine correspondence between Bharat Biotech and WHO in a very opaque way, because nobody knows what WHO is asking and what Bharat Biotech is giving, and half of it is guesswork. The problem is there is no transparency in this whole process on either side. I think that is what needs to be, understood. I think both the organizations have to come out openly what WHO is asking and what Bharat Biotech is giving. And this process has to end very soon, so that not only the Indian students who are going abroad, who need a clearance, etc., that is one issue so far as we are concerned. But I would look at the broad concern of the humanity, because when so many people are not vaccinated, I mean, we all say that nobody is safe unless everybody is vaccinated, then where are we going? And WHO is the organization which has to be most concerned about that part. And WHO keeps on saying that his biggest priority is to see that everyone is vaccinated. So why not Covaxin? The other vaccines may be available, but many of them are at a huge cost.
Yes.
But here is a vaccine which is available is much more affordable than many of those vaccines. So you try to facilitate the process, try to enter into dialogue between the two, and see that whatever concerns you have are explained. I mean, that's all we are asking. Nobody says that, you just cut the corners or give shortcut, but nobody is putting pressure and all that. These are all, conjectures. I mean, I don't think anybody is able to put pressure on WHO to give approval for a vaccine, and they won't do it also. They are not under obligation to do it. So I think it's high time that this entire process has to be fast-tracked in the interest of the African nations, and also mostly in the interest of the Indian students who are traveling abroad. In India also, about 100 million people have already taken this vaccine.
Yes.
And we are not hearing any side effects or anybody falling sick or anybody dying, etc. There have been no adverse event reporting.
Yes, well, about 11.8 crore doses of Covaxin have already been administered in our country.
Have been given. So where is the
we've
problem?
also given this vaccine to several other countries. So that's the other aspect.
We shouldn't take it from an extremely legalistic point of view.
Yeah.
We should look at the exigence of the situation, the interests of the people who are not vaccinated in Africa and other parts of the world, and see that the whole process is expedited. That's all we are saying.
Yes, so that's the important part. To say that the process should be expedited without cutting corners, which is what WHO last time around also emphasized, that we will not cut corners. But Dr. Rajesh Parekh, simply because these many doses have been given and we've been using this vaccine for a year, there doesn't seem to be disaster striking us. Obviously can't be reasons for WHO to say, okay, let's then just go ahead. They have to follow their process.
Well, good evening, Tanvi. Always a pleasure to be on your incisive program. You and I have an interesting track history, but I'll allude to that a little later. First of all, I am generally in complete concurrence with the excellent, valid points made by my colleagues. And I think everything that either Ms. Ghosh or Dr. Mishra or Mr. Nilkanthan or Mr. Rao has said is valid, and there's no repetition except one issue, and that of transparency. And when I kind of touch upon the timeline, we will understand why it is in the very intrinsic nature of this process that it has to be opaque and cannot be transparent. In both my books on the coronavirus and the vaccine, I have been critical of the WHO on several counts, but for now, I have to give them their due. So let us understand the timeline and the process. On the 19th of April, Bharat Biotech applied to the WHO with an EOI, which is called an expression of interest, for a EUL. So a lot of these alphabets thrown around, which is emergency use listing. So they applied for it. And thereafter, they were asked to submit documents, which they have from time to time. And the last of it was actually yesterday. So on the 26th of October, they had to submit some more documents. And I believe on the 3rd of November, we should get a decision from the WHO. But I think what is important and what we have to understand to be able to appreciate the WHO's position a little better is that it is very different from that given by regulatory bodies in nations. In that most regulatory bodies require data, whether it is published or peer reviewed is often irrelevant, but they need to look at the real data. And that's about it. But with the WHO, there's a lot more than the data. They look at the manufacturing process. They need to look at the real world data, which has happened outside. And since the manufacturing process is proprietary, it is not put out there. So when the WHO looks at this data, because a lot of it is proprietary, patent, intellectually protected information, it is opaque and it is not put out. The pharmaceuticals would not want it that way. Now, when all the data is collated, not just again to repeat the clinical trial data, but the manufacturing, various other issues are collated, it is in the nature of things that the WHO is going to ask questions. That's their job. And when they ask questions, as the answers come in, it's possible, as has happened in this case, that there are going to be some more questions. So this is a process which happens everywhere. The limited process, which is just looking at the data, if you look at that, the European Union has not, EU has not recognized Covaxin, the UK has not recognized Covaxin, nor has the US. But interestingly, on the same day, 26th, that's yesterday, two interesting developments in the US. The US has given Covaxin a grudging approval under other vaccines where people have participated in clinical trials. What this means is whoever has participated in a clinical trial by virtue of having a heroic act, along with a bunch of other vaccines which the US doesn't yet recognize, would be considered eligible to enter the United States. Also, on the 26th of October, yesterday, a company with which Bharat Biotech collaborates has applied now to the FDA to conduct a trial in the US. So there have all been very interesting developments yesterday, but I think the WHO is justified in demanding a lot of data. We cannot expect them to be transparent. I mean, imagine if they put out the whole manufacturing process of Bharat Covaxin, the company will be the first to...
No, see, let me clarify. I'm not saying that the data should be transparent. I'm telling the entire process has to be transparent. See, we all know that the data is very much proprietary and it cannot be revealed. But the entire process, what is going on between WHO and Bharat Biotech is not known to the people. What exactly is happening there? Why is it taking so much of time? That is the process which will have to be transparent.
Okay, one interesting part that you've highlighted, Dr. Parekh, is that, they don't just look at the trial scientific data, but also a lot more about the manufacturing facilities itself and so on and so forth. Now, let me ask you this. Is there a possibility, because, many keep raising this argument, is there a possibility that other controversies regarding Covaxin have also put the, WHO committees on a bit of a alert and edge, or they are being extra careful, whether it's what happened in Brazil, or some of the reports that came out about the way the trials were being conducted here or elsewhere? Are those controversies something that will also play in the minds of the panel?
Of course, they should. And let me again explain here that the limited approval, the limited look at the data is what countries do. So even if you look at partially at the data, ours has been the only country which has been in a tremendous rush to approve Bharat vaccine, and that was also controversial when it happened. A lot of red lights were gone through. The data had not been looked at properly. Turned out it was not a bad decision. It's like going through 3 red lights and not getting into an accident. Well and good. The process by which Bharat vaccine got its approval was flawed. No other country in the world only looks at the data, which of course is not proprietary, that is open, which looks at the data has not granted approval. No country has granted approval as yet. Now, as far as the WHO is concerned, there are 2 distinct things, Mr. Rao. One is data, and the other is proprietary information. the proprietary information has to be looked at by WHO. Are you manufacturing correctly? Are your SOPs right? Are all your plants working to the same standard? And that cannot be transparent. They can't put it out there. So what the WHO does, let me explain this to you, if you don't interrupt me this time. What the WHO does is it gathers this information, it doesn't put it out. Finally, it will say yes or no. It will not illustrate all this. As far as the process is concerned, it's clean and transparent. You submit your data, we ask you questions, you answer them, we seek clarifications. Once we are satisfied, we give you a yes or no, which we are expecting on the 3rd of November. And finally, I alluded to my track record with Tanvi on 3 occasions. We've hit a hat trick where Tanvi has raised a very controversial issue, and within days, it has been approved. The last was when I was in Paris, and there was a big mess up with the UK and Covishield, and that within 2 days, they granted that permission. And the UK is in a mess, as I had predicted a month ago. I predicted, Tanvi, if you recollect, that the concern is in the opposite direction. We should be worried about the UK rather than be worried about us. And that has happened. So we've had a clean track record, and I'm optimistic that by the 3rd of November, if information is in and the answers are given, the approval will come in. But even people who have looked at half the data have not given approval. So let's not fault the WHO. I mean, they've made a lot of mistakes, but let's give them some slack when they're following due process.
Okay, let me also go back to Bantika on, because it impacts a lot of people's international travel plans, it raises several concerns, and it is the pet project of the government. It involves ICMR as well. Bantika, have there been attempts by the government to really, get into this to see what is going on and what can be really done to fast track the process?
Absolutely. This was one of the one of the primary topics of discussion, as I mentioned in last week's meeting of the health minister and the DG WHO. This was discussed at great length. The government actually said that, we have given you everything. And this was, mind you, this was just one day after WHO gave that statement about cutting corners. So there was a lot of anxiety here. And the government was very clear. So when I spoke to them, they were very clear that we don't know what WHO means by cutting corners. We will go by what the DG WHO has told us, and that is that they have all the information necessary. So this was definitely discussed. The government is pulling its weight. But I have to make this point, Mr. Neelkantan made this point, but I need to sort of reiterate it. See, WHO does what is called a risk-benefit analysis. And from WHO's perspective, the benefit is not our being able to travel abroad. The benefit is whether vaccines are given out. And let's face it, Bharat Biotech has consistently underperformed in terms of output, vaccine output. Just imagine this. A little over 10% of your 1 billion vaccine doses came from them. Their actual manufacturing capacity is really, really low. They don't have vaccines. I mean, if government allows, they may make some exports, but let's face it, they are not even being able to meet their domestic commitments. That's the kind of, for whatever reasons, the fact that it's a complicated process, you need a higher biosafety level, all of that. So maybe by the time Indian Immunologicals and Hafkin and all of those places start manufacturing Covaxin, maybe the situation will become better. But that's not going to happen in several months now. So from WHO's perspective, there is really no hurry. They will not get vaccines. It's just about us traveling. How many people? 11 crore Indians? Not even 11 crore, actually 5 crore, because 2-dose vaccine.
Yes.
So that's actually, when you sort of put it in perspective, it's a very small consideration.
But what about Bharat Biotech? Are they also not in hurry? Because any which ways, they are still yet to ramp up their production to the expectation that they themselves had.
Yes, they are in a hurry, but there are some conditions that have to be met before this production can go further. There were delays in decision making. We've discussed this in your show earlier also. February, Hafkin said we can manufacture, government did not move. So all of those things have happened. So we have had a bit of a lag in our starting off. So, and that we are paying for, that even Covaxin is paying for Bharat Biotech, because you can't scale up this vaccine the same way as you can scale up Covishield, because it's a different technology. So while Serum has done it way, way faster, and literally our vaccination program is resting on serum currently. Covaxin is, you make a very important nationalistic point, but let's face it, it's a very tiny fraction of the vaccines.
Fair
And
enough. The point that you're making, and yes, perhaps that also weighs in as a factor on the sense of urgency when entities have to decide on it. But I also want to go back to a comment that and a tweet that Soumya Vishwanathan of the Soumya Swaminathan of the WHO put out. And Swaminathan actually says that while countries must follow the list of vaccines that have been approved by the WHO, they shouldn't make that certificate the only factor in forming their policies, and especially travel policies. And she makes the argument about how global travel and economics and development is being impacted. That's a crucial issue, Murli, that WHO has raised, irrespective of whether Covaxin is on the list or not. Can we look at a situation where countries actually don't make it a necessity for entry into their country?
WHO is nothing. It's not a travel agent. It doesn't issue visas. Doesn't do any of these things. So let's not add on to the burden that WHO already has. So the fact that Indians who have taken Covaxin are likely to be affected in their travel is really of no relevance to the process that the WHO follows. So let's not impose this burden on them to say you are now on trial for making sure that Indians can travel to wherever it is that they want to go on holiday. So that's not really their job. They don't really care much about it. We've seen this issue of vaccine certificates, vaccine passports, whatever you want to call it, not being one central issue being dealt with in one way. Every country is free based on its own public health perspectives and the way they look at risk to decide how to do it. So it has nothing to do with whether WHO approves it or not. Countries make their own minds up on this. What they can do is rely on the WHO when there is a list and say, okay, if it's approved by the WHO, it's easy. If it's approved by the EU, it's easy. If it's approved by any other stringent regulatory authority, it's easy. So we don't have to sit and make a list. We can just take somebody else's list and say, this is all okay. So, but that's not the only list they can make. So what you will see is countries make up their own mind, but to the extent they can rely on stringent regulatory authorities or the WHO, they will, because they know somebody has done this exercise. It has been reviewed. It is at least as good as what it says on the can. So that's the exercise that the WHO will do, and that's what countries are relying on. I just want to make 2 points to respond to Mr. Rao. Covaxin is not going to be made in Africa anytime soon, not before the pandemic. They can't even make it in India in the several plants that they have, and they've been trying for the last 1 year. So I don't think that is going to fly very much with the WHO to say, please give EUL for Covaxin, and we're going to have 2 billion doses ready for Africa. That's not going to happen. The GMP issue is real. If we can't fix GMP in this country, it's highly unlikely that you can take a process where you don't have a stable GMP in India and you can put it in Africa. Many have tried. It's not that easy. Third, it is not inexpensive. In India, we know for a fact that it is more expensive than Covishield. Covishield is already part of the COVAX program. So, all these only muddle the issue for the WHO approval. The WHO, if you go with these 4 issues to WHO, they'll laugh you out of the room because all of them have absolutely no basis and most of it is just misdirection. So I don't think any of this is relevant for the WHO.
The point that you made, and because it was raised earlier also, and for the understanding of our viewers, GMP, essentially good manufacturing practices, often are pharma manufacturers, while they are the suppliers to the world, often they get into trouble with the US FDA because they're not able to keep up to their manufacturing standards in their facilities. So that, like you said, is a big factor. But where does Bharat Biotech or Covaxin come into the picture, Murli, if you could explain that, when it comes to GMP?
So the GMP is a term that we use for a process that is standard. So all the regulators will look at is, do you have a process? Does that process make sense? Does it have standards and controls? Are you following them? So it's a book that you claim you follow, and then they want data to show that you actually follow it. That's as simple as that. how do we know whether something is GMP compliant or not? As a rule of thumb, if the product that is manufactured using the same process, the same raw materials in two different plants are identical, then you know largely that they're doing the same thing in both plants. In the case of Bharat Biotech, they've not been able to replicate that process in other plants. So whatever it is that they did in the first plant, they took the same process, same raw materials, did it in another plant, and it didn't produce the same results. Now, that is perfectly understandable with something like biologics, with vaccines, because it's not a pure chemical process. You allow for some differences. Those are natural. Batch to batch, you will find certain differences. This is all acceptable. The challenge is when it goes beyond that acceptable standard, when they don't match their own standards. So if it has not happened, then you have a problem by saying, okay, the raw materials are the same. Why isn't it producing the same result? And the answer is the process is just not good enough. Now, if it's not good enough for replication in India, which is three plants are not producing the same output with the same raw materials using the same process, how is it likely you're going to be able to produce this in Africa, which has absolutely no technical ability for so many years for
Right.
producing any vaccine or a biological product? So all of that, is something for them to worry about.
Yes.
The fact that there was an issue with the process when Anvisa, the Brazilian regulator, looked at the GMP and said, hey, we don't find a control for a very important part of your process, which is how do you deal with the vaccine while you kill it? And tell us how you check for it. Tell us how it is that you know that certain amount of efficacious vaccine is there in every batch, in every vial. So these are all procedural issues. How do you test for it? This is all part of GMP. To know that there is a standard process, it is being followed, and if you follow it with the raw materials on your list, it will produce this product. That standardization is what is being checked, and there are questions being asked about it, and maybe that's the answers that BB has to provide to the WHO.
Yes. Okay. One other aspect, and Dr. Parekh, if you want to come in on this, while we wait for this, there are also, like you pointed out, the European Union itself and UK and several other countries who haven't given their nod to Covaxin. Now, what can be done to resolve that? What is it that the company itself or the government can actually do to get that name on the list?
Okay, my frank take on that, do nothing. Because it's due process, we should not be seen to be actively and politically interfering in that. Now, I want to add two things to the excellent points that Mr. Nilakanthan made. And in fact, both the EU and I believe the UK as well have said that they are waiting for the WHO report. So, in fact, what he suggested is what they're about to do. They're waiting for the EU, for the WHO report before taking a call on this. And you know why this is important to look at what the process is across? I'll tell you what history has shown us. So in the 60s, when the polio vaccine came out, there was a laboratory called the Cutter Laboratory. And this is a very infamous incident in the history of vaccines. I've covered it in the vaccine book. And when they were making the polio vaccine, because the standards were not uniform, exactly what Mr. Nilakanthan said, that they went beyond the standards of acceptability. Some of the vaccines turned out to be contaminated. These resulted in 200,000 children contracting polio because of the vaccine, and resulted, I forget the exact number, but several children who were handicapped for life, and there were even a few deaths. This is the kind of thing that fuels the nonsense that happens in the anti-vaxxers. We are giving them fuel for what they're saying, and then somebody is justified in saying that, well, when so many people got polio because of the vaccine, when so many people died, we don't trust vaccines at all. So whatever the WHO is doing, Tanvi, it's a process that has to be followed. And I'm so happy that none of our panelists, actually, that was my concern. I was worried that some of our panelists may bring the race card again and say, oh, because this is India. And I think none of us has brought that up. I think we all understand, and by and large, we've all been in concurrence, that this is a process which has to be followed. And it's for good of all people. Okay, we are in a hurry to travel. But if we are traveling with a vaccine which does not meet certain standards, we then become a danger to other countries.
So, well, Dr. Parekh, the idea of having all of you was to actually answer that concern, or that narrative that many may have heard about, WHO's biasness, or even to say they want to block this because, well, there are other pharmaceutical companies and lobbies at play, and many of those conversations that have happened. And so I wanted, all of you experts here to explain to our viewers what goes into the process and why it is taking this time. Yes, Mr. Rao, the last comment to you.
I'm sorry for coming in. You see, in all this discussion, what has not come out very clearly is sense of urgency. We are living through a public health emergency. Somehow or the other, in this discussion, that aspect is not coming out at all. We are only talking about rules, regulations, procedures, WHO. It's all fine. But it is ultimately a matter of saving people's lives, right? So there has to be a certain of urgency with the WHO also. They are not sitting in another planet. They are here. And this is not the first time they are giving such emergency approvals.
Yes.
If they want to sort of do it faster, there are ways of doing it faster.
Well, I think, Mr. Rao, while you have a valid point.
Also, let me tell you, earlier also in the case of polio, etc., there have been delays in giving these approvals. But luckily, we were not affected because we didn't have to export that. We were using it for our own eradication program, and it was successfully done. Ultimately, they came and gave it when the sense of urgency came in other countries, when the other countries are pressuring them to get some vaccines from India.
Yes,
so it's not
I think what you're saying is very important.
I'm sorry to say this. We are putting WHO as a paragon of virtue. I beg to differ with that.
No, but Mr. Rao, I think the argument is, and that was actually pointed out here, Mr. Rao, is that the sense of urgency argument doesn't play here because Bharat Biotech is not even able to produce those many vaccines as we speak. They have struggled with their manufacture. So even if the approval was here, we are not going to be able to save too many lives because Bharat Biotech isn't producing those many doses.
No, even for Bharat Biotech, this applies not only to WHO, to Bharat Biotech also. If they are taking it casually, if they are delaying supplying information, they are also being has to be faulted. So, the whole process, the sense of urgency is not being understood by anyone. Where are the vaccines? In India also, we need again the second dose. So many people have to be vaccinated. We need to send vaccines to other countries. On one side, we say we are the pharmacy of the world. What is the pharmacy of the world if you can't get an approval for your own vaccine? I mean, there is this is the problem that unfortunately upsets everyone.
Yes, no, so Mr. Rao, while you are raising the point that many have in mind, which is exactly why I wanted to do this conversation, I think what some of the experts here are telling us is that there isn't that level of urgency to save more lives because Bharat Biotech is not able to produce the doses. It's not about the level of non-seriousness in giving the information to WHO, but the fact that any which ways, right now they're struggling with their production and to ramp up that production. And so while they figure that part out, WHO can take its time to look into things. Yes, there are obviously many things that WHO wants to know. And so they keep going back to Bharat Biotech and keep asking for more information, additional clarifications. Now, whether it's additional information or additional clarification, that back and forth is what is taking place, which is why the approval hasn't come in yet. But hopefully soon, because even if it is 5 or 6 crore people who've so far taken the vaccine, and obviously not all of them are going to be traveling anywhere, it puts in a doubt in the minds of people about the vaccine. It also puts in a doubt in the minds of people of what is it that the international agencies are doing and why it's not being done. And at the end of the day, if you're making a good quality vaccine, we must be able to present the information to get the global recognition for that vaccine. That, at the end of the day, actually interests every citizen of this country, hence this conversation. Let's hope Bharat Biotech is able to answer all of those queries for WHO to convince them this is a good vaccine, manufactured under good conditions that should be used on people across the world. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for joining me on this conversation.